Can you take me to find my mom?" The little black girl asked the grumpy billionaire next door. The rain was coming down so hard that night that it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the windows. Marcus Thornton sat in his big empty house, staring at papers about money and companies, when he heard a small knock at his door. It was past 9 at night and nobody ever came to visit him. He had made sure of that by being mean to everyone for the past 10 years since his wife died. When he opened the heavy wooden door, there stood a little girl, maybe 7 years old, soaking wet from the rain. Her dark skin was shining with raindrops and her braided hair was dripping water onto his expensive doormat. She was wearing a torn yellow raincoat that was too small for her, and her brown eyes were the biggest, saddest eyes Marcus had ever seen. "Can you take me to find my mom?" the little black girl asked the grumpy billionaire next door, her voice shaking like a leaf in the wind. Marcus just stood there, not knowing what to say. He had built walls around his heart so thick that nothing could get through, or so he thought. The girl's name was Destiny, and she lived in the small apartment building next to his mansion with her mother, Grace. Marcus had seen them sometimes, walking to the bus stop. The mother always holding the daughter's hand tight like she was afraid to let go. Now here was this child standing in the rain, asking him for help. "Where is your mother?" Marcus asked, his voice rough from not talking to anyone for days. Destiny looked down at her wet shoes and said, "She went to work 3 days ago and didn't come back. The lady at the shelter said she might be at the hospital, but I don't know which one. You have a car. Can you help me?" Marcus wanted to close the door and go back to his papers and his lonely life. But something about the way she said it, like she had already tried everything else and he was her last hope, made him pause. The truth was that Marcus had not always been mean and alone. Once upon a time, he had been happy, with a wife named Sarah who made him laugh every day, and a daughter named Lily who was just about Destiny's age when she died in the same car accident that took Sarah. That was 10 years ago, and Marcus had spent every day since then building his fortune bigger and bigger, as if money could fill the hole in his heart. He had moved to this neighborhood because nobody knew him here, and he could be alone with his sadness. But now this little girl was standing at his door, and she needed help. "Please," Destiny said, and a tear rolled down her cheek, mixing with the rain. "I'm scared. I don't want to be alone anymore." Those words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach because he knew exactly how that felt. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have someone need him. Without really thinking about it, he grabbed his coat and his car keys. "Come on," he said, trying to sound less grumpy than usual. "Let's go find your mother." They got into Marcus's expensive black car, and Destiny sat in the back seat, looking so small against the leather seats. As they drove through the rainy streets, she told him about her mother. Grace worked 3 jobs to pay for their tiny apartment. She cleaned offices at night, worked at a grocery store during the day, and sometimes did extra cleaning jobs on weekends. "She's always tired," Destiny said, "but she always reads me a story before bed, even when her eyes can barely stay open." Marcus listened and felt something crack inside his chest, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. This mother was working herself to death to take care of her child, while he sat in his mansion with more money than he could ever spend, feeling sorry for himself. They went to the first hospital, but Grace wasn't there. Then the second, and the third. Each time, Destiny would run up to the desk with Marcus behind her, and each time they would shake their heads no. By the 4th hospital, it was past midnight, and Destiny was starting to cry for real now. Not just little tears, but big sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus didn't know what to do with a crying child. It had been so long since Lily died that he had forgotten. But his body seemed to remember because he found himself kneeling down and putting his hand on Destiny's shoulder. "We'll find her," he said, and he was surprised to realize he meant it. "I promise we'll find her." They kept searching, and at each hospital, Marcus started using his power and money in ways he hadn't in years. He called administrators he knew, demanded to speak to supervisors, and offered donations if they would check their records again. He was Marcus Thornton after all, one of the richest men in the city, and when he wanted something done, it got done. Finally, at the 6th hospital, just as the sun was starting to come up and paint the sky pink and orange, a nurse recognized Grace's description. "We have a woman who matches that description in the ICU," she said. "She was brought in 3 days ago. She collapsed at her workplace from exhaustion and dehydration. She's been unconscious, but she's starting to wake up now." Destiny ran so fast down that hospital hallway that Marcus could barely keep up with her. When they got to the room and Destiny saw her mother lying in that hospital bed with tubes and machines all around her, she let out a sound that was part sob and part relief. Grace's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw her daughter, she started to cry too. "My baby," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I scared you." Destiny climbed right up onto that hospital bed and hugged her mother like she would never let go. Marcus stood in the doorway watching this reunion, and suddenly he couldn't see clearly because his eyes were full of tears. He hadn't cried since Sarah and Lily's funeral, but now the tears were coming whether he wanted them or not. Grace looked over at him, this grumpy billionaire who had brought her daughter to her, and she mouthed the words "thank you" with such gratitude that Marcus had to look away. The doctor came in and explained that Grace had been working so hard and eating so little that her body had just given up. She needed rest, lots of rest, and good food and less stress. But how could she rest when she had bills to pay and a daughter to feed? That's when Marcus heard himself saying something that surprised everyone, including himself. "I'll take care of it," he said. "The bills, the apartment, everything. You just focus on getting better." Grace tried to protest, but Marcus held up his hand. "Please," he said, and his voice was softer than it had been in years. "Let me help. It's been a long time since I've done anything that mattered." Over the next few weeks, while Grace recovered in the hospital, Destiny stayed with Marcus in his big house. At first it was awkward. Marcus didn't know how to take care of a child anymore, and Destiny was shy around this grumpy man who lived in a house that looked like a castle. But slowly, something magical started to happen. Destiny would do her homework at his big dining table while Marcus worked on his business papers, and sometimes she would ask him for help with math, which he was good at. He would make her peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, cutting them into triangles the way Lily used to like them, and Destiny would tell him stories about school. One night, Destiny found a photo album that Marcus had hidden away in a closet. It was full of pictures of Sarah and Lily, and instead of getting angry like he might have before, Marcus sat down with Destiny and told her about them. He told her about how Sarah used to dance in the kitchen while cooking dinner, and how Lily loved to paint pictures of butterflies. Destiny listened with her big brown eyes wide open, and then she said something that changed everything. "They would be happy that you're helping us," she said. "I think they sent me to your door that night." Marcus felt his heart, which had been frozen for so long, start to melt completely. This little girl had done what no amount of money or success could do. She had reminded him how to care about someone else again. When Grace finally got out of the hospital, Marcus had already arranged everything. He had paid off all their debts, found Grace a single good job with regular hours and health insurance at one of his companies, and had even set up a college fund for Destiny. But more than that, he had become part of their lives. Grace was suspicious at first, wondering why this rich man would help them. But when she saw how Destiny had started calling him Uncle Marcus, and how his eyes had lost that cold, dead look they used to have, she understood. Sometimes broken people find each other and help to put the pieces back together. Marcus started joining them for dinner in their small apartment, which Grace insisted on keeping because she wanted to pay her own rent with her new job. He would bring dessert, and they would sit around the tiny table, talking and laughing. Destiny would show him her drawings from school, and Grace would tell stories about her customers at work, and Marcus would feel like he had a family again. Not a replacement for Sarah and Lily, but a new family that had room in it for his memories of them too. The walls he had built around his heart came down brick by brick, and in their place grew something new and beautiful. On the anniversary of Sarah and Lily's death, Marcus always used to lock himself in his house and drink expensive whiskey until he couldn't feel anything anymore. But this year, Destiny and Grace showed up at his door with flowers. "We thought you might not want to be alone today," Grace said softly. They went to the cemetery together, and Destiny put flowers on the graves of the wife and daughter she had never met but felt like she knew from all of Marcus's stories. "Thank you for sharing him with us," Destiny whispered to the headstones, and Marcus had to turn away because he was crying again. But these weren't the bitter, angry tears he had cried for so many years. These were tears of gratitude and healing and something that felt almost like hope. They spent the rest of the day together, looking through photo albums and sharing memories. And by the end of it, Marcus realized that his heart, while still carrying the scars of loss, was no longer broken. It had been put back together, different than before, but still capable of love. As the months passed, their unusual family grew stronger. Marcus taught Destiny how to play chess, and she taught him how to laugh again. Grace taught him how to cook simple meals, and he taught her that it was okay to accept help sometimes. They celebrated holidays together, mixing their traditions into something new and special. On Thanksgiving, they had turkey and mac and cheese and Marcus's mother's special stuffing recipe that he hadn't made since Sarah died. On Christmas, they decorated both Marcus's huge tree and Grace and Destiny's small one, and Destiny insisted on leaving cookies for Santa at both houses, just in case. When Destiny's birthday came around, Marcus went overboard with presents. But the gift she loved most was a simple picture frame with a photo of all three of them at the park, laughing at something silly, looking like a real family. "This is my family," she told everyone at school, showing off the picture. "That's my mom and that's my Uncle Marcus. He used to be grumpy, but I fixed him." The neighborhood started to notice the change in Marcus, too. The grumpy billionaire who used to yell at kids to stay off his lawn was now the man who helped organize block parties and donated money to fix up the local playground. He started a fund to help single parents in the neighborhood with emergency expenses, remembering how one act of kindness from a desperate little girl had saved him from drowning in his own sorrow. Other rich people thought he had gone crazy, giving away so much money and time to people who didn't matter. But Marcus knew better now. He had learned that the only things that really mattered were the connections between people, the love they shared, and the help they gave each other. All his billions hadn't made him happy when he was alone. But now, with so much less focus on money and more focus on people, he woke up each morning with a reason to smile. One day, about a year after that rainy night when Destiny knocked on his door, Marcus was sitting in his home office when he heard a familiar knock. He opened the door to find Destiny standing there, but this time she wasn't wet or scared or looking for her mother. She was holding a piece of paper, beaming with pride. "I got an A on my story," she said, bouncing on her toes. "Want to hear it?" Marcus sat down and listened as Destiny read her story about a sad dragon who lived alone in a big castle until a brave little girl asked him for help finding her mother. The dragon learned that helping others was the best way to heal his own broken heart, and they all lived happily ever after. "Is it about us?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. Destiny nodded. "My teacher said it was the best story she ever read from a second grader. She said it had heart." Marcus pulled Destiny into a hug, something he did easily now without thinking about it. "It does have heart," he agreed. "The biggest heart I know." That evening, Marcus had dinner with Grace and Destiny as usual, but he had something important to say. He had been thinking about it for months, but he wanted to be sure it was right. "I want to adopt you both," he said, the words tumbling out faster than he planned. "I mean, not adopt Grace, obviously, but I want to be Destiny's legal guardian too, if you'll let me. And I want you both to move into the house. There's so much room, and we're already a family, and—" He stopped because Grace was crying and Destiny had launched herself at him for another hug. "Is that a yes?" he asked, and they both nodded, too emotional to speak. The legal stuff took some time, but 6 months later, it was official. Destiny had 2 legal guardians who loved her more than anything in the world, and Marcus had a family again. They turned his big empty house into a home full of laughter and music and the sound of Destiny's feet running up and down the stairs. They put up pictures everywhere, not just of Sarah and Lily, but of their new family, too. The past and the present lived together on those walls, showing that love doesn't end when people die and that hearts can grow bigger to hold new people without forgetting the old ones. Grace went back to school to become a nurse, something she had always dreamed of but never thought possible. Marcus paid for it, of course, but more importantly, he helped take care of Destiny in the evening so Grace could study. They would do homework together, Destiny with her second-grade math and Marcus helping Grace with her anatomy flashcards. It became their routine, their rhythm, their life. When Grace graduated, Marcus and Destiny were in the front row, cheering so loud that people turned to stare. "That's my mom!" Destiny yelled to anyone who would listen. "She's going to be a nurse and help people." Marcus just stood there clapping, tears streaming down his face, not caring who saw. The grumpy billionaire was gone forever, replaced by a man who had learned that the secret to happiness wasn't in keeping your heart safe from hurt, but in opening it wide enough to let love in, even when it scared you. Years passed, and Destiny grew from a scared little girl into a confident young woman. She was the valedictorian of her high school, and in her graduation speech she told the story of the night she knocked on a stranger's door looking for her mother. "That night taught me that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places," she said. "That broken people can heal each other, and that families aren't just about blood, but about choice. We choose to love each other. We choose to show up for each other. We choose to be family." When she looked out at the audience and saw Marcus and Grace sitting together, both crying and holding hands, she knew she was the luckiest girl in the world. Not because Marcus was rich, but because she had two parents who had chosen her and each other, who had built a family out of loss and hope and the kind of love that refuses to give up. Marcus walked Destiny down the aisle at her wedding, sharing that honor with Grace. His hair was gray now, and he moved a little slower, but his eyes were bright with joy. As he placed Destiny's hand in her husband's, he whispered, "Thank you for saving me that night." She squeezed his hand and whispered back, "Thank you for opening the door." At the reception, Marcus gave a speech that had everyone in tears. He talked about how a little girl in a yellow raincoat had brought him back to life, how her mother had taught him that strength wasn't about having money but about having courage, and how they had all learned that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. "Can you take me to find my mom?" He repeated Destiny's words from that night so long ago. Those 7 words changed 3 lives forever. They taught an old grumpy billionaire that his heart still worked, that love was still possible, and that the greatest wealth in the world is having people who need you and whom you need in return. When Grace got sick with cancer 5 years later, Marcus and Destiny took turns sitting with her through chemo treatments. They held her hand when she was scared, made her laugh when she felt like crying, and reminded her every day that she wasn't fighting alone. Marcus paid for the best doctors, of course, but more importantly, he was there. He showed up every day with Grace's favorite soup from the restaurant she liked, and he would sit and read to her from the romance novels she loved but was too embarrassed to admit she enjoyed. When she lost her hair, Destiny shaved her own head in solidarity, and Marcus joked that he would too if he had any hair left to shave. They were a team, a family, united in their love for each other and their determination to fight together. When Grace finally rang the bell signaling the end of her treatment and her victory over cancer, Marcus and Destiny were there, crying and cheering and holding each other up. "We did it," Grace said, and she was right. They had done it together, as a family. Now, as Marcus sat in his garden watching Destiny's children play, he thought about that rainy night so many years ago. His grandson, little Marcus Jr., they called him MJ, was 7, the same age Destiny had been when she knocked on his door. His granddaughter, Sarah Grace, was 5 and had her grandmother's fighting spirit and her mother's big heart. They called him Grandpa Marcus, and they had no idea that he had once been a grumpy billionaire who had given up on life. To them, he was just Grandpa, who told the best stories and gave the best hugs and always had candy in his pockets. Grace sat beside him, her hair gray now but still beautiful, working on her knitting. They had become true partners over the years, best friends who had raised a daughter together and now helped raise grandchildren. Sometimes people assumed they were a couple, but they would just laugh. Their love was different than that, but just as deep. They were family in the truest sense of the word. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't knocked on your door that night?" Destiny asked, joining them in the garden while her husband played with the kids. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Every single day," he said. "That was the night my life really began. Everything before that was just existing. You and your mother taught me how to live again. Grace reached over and squeezed his hand. "You saved us too, you know. Not just with money, but with love. You gave us a family when we only had each other." They sat there in comfortable silence, three people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to be each other's light. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and the children's laughter filled the air. This was wealth, Marcus thought. This was success. Not the billions in his bank account, but these people, this love, this family that had grown from one desperate, rainy night when a little girl asked a grumpy billionaire for help. As night fell and they all went inside for dinner, Marcus stopped at the doorway and looked back at his garden. He could almost see them there, Sarah and Lily, smiling and waving, telling him they were proud of him for opening his heart again. He had learned that grief and joy could exist together, that loving new people didn't mean forgetting the ones you lost, and that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places. "Can you take me to find my mom?" Those words had started everything, had broken down his walls and rebuilt his life. He had helped a little girl find her mother, but in the process, she had helped him find himself. And that, he knew, was the real miracle. As he closed the door and joined his family for dinner, listening to the chaos and laughter that filled his once empty house, Marcus Thornton, former grumpy billionaire, current devoted grandfather, whispered a prayer of thanks for that brave little girl who had refused to give up, who had knocked on his door when everyone else would have walked past, and who had shown him that it's never too late to start living again. The years continued to pass, full of birthday parties and holiday celebrations, graduations and weddings, tears and laughter. Marcus's health began to fail when he reached his 80s, but he faced it with grace and courage, surrounded by the family he had chosen and who had chosen him. Destiny, now a successful pediatrician, would come by every day to check on him. She had dedicated her life to helping children, inspired by the man who had helped her when she needed it most. Grace, retired from nursing but still strong, would sit with him, and they would remember all their adventures together, all the ways they had saved each other. When Marcus passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 85, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Not business associates or society friends, but real people whose lives he had touched. Single mothers he had helped, children who had gone to college because of scholarships he had funded, families who had kept their homes because of his generosity. They all had stories about the grumpy billionaire who had become a pillar of the community, who had learned that true wealth meant using what you have to help others. Destiny gave the eulogy, standing at the podium in the same church where she had married, where her children had been baptized, where they had celebrated Grace beating cancer. "Marcus Thornton was not my biological father," she said, her voice strong despite her tears, "but he was my dad in every way that mattered. He taught me that families are made of love, not just DNA. He showed me that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you're meant to be. He used to be known as a grumpy billionaire, but I knew him as the man who drove all night to find my mother, who taught me to play chess, who walked me down the aisle at my wedding, who held my children when they were born. He was proof that broken hearts can heal and that love is the only thing worth investing in." She paused, looking at Grace, who was crying but smiling. "The night I knocked on his door, I was just looking for my mom. But I found so much more. I found a father, a family, and a love that will last forever. Thank you, Dad, for opening that door. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for teaching us that the question, 'Can you take me to find my mom?' can lead to finding a whole family." After the funeral, Destiny and Grace went through Marcus's things together. They found letters he had written to Sarah and Lily over the years, telling them about his new family, about how Destiny reminded him of Lily's courage and Grace reminded him of Sarah's strength. They found the yellow raincoat Destiny had worn that first night, carefully preserved in a box with a note that said, "The night my life began again." They found photo albums filled with pictures of their unconventional family, every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary Tuesday that had become special because they were together. In his will, Marcus had left most of his fortune to charity, specifically to organizations that helped single parents and children in need. But to Destiny and Grace, he left the house and enough money to never worry again, along with a letter that said simply, "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for being my family. Thank you for teaching me that love is the only legacy that matters. Take care of each other. Remember that you changed a grumpy billionaire into a happy grandfather. That's the real fortune you gave me." Years later, when Destiny was a grandmother herself, she would tell the story to her grandchildren, how she had been a scared little girl who knocked on a stranger's door, and how that stranger became family. She would show them the pictures, the yellow raincoat, the chess set Marcus had taught her on. She would tell them about Grace, their great-grandmother, who had worked 3 jobs and never gave up. She would tell them about Marcus, who had learned that opening your door to someone in need might just save your own life, too. And always, always, she would end the story the same way. Remember, my loves, that family isn't just about who you're born to. It's about who shows up when you need them. It's about who opens the door when you knock. It's about choosing love even when you're scared, choosing hope even when you're broken, and choosing each other every single day. Can you take me to find my mom? That's how our family started, with a question and a choice to help. And that's how we'll always be. A family that chooses each other over and over again. The house still stands in that neighborhood, no longer owned by a grumpy billionaire but filled with the laughter of Destiny's children and grandchildren. In the garden where Marcus used to sit grows a tree they planted in his memory. Strong and tall, its branches reaching toward the sky while its roots go deep into the earth. Sometimes on rainy nights, Destiny stands at the window and remembers being 7 years old, scared and alone, knocking on that door. She remembers the grumpy man who answered, how his face had been hard but his eyes had been sad. She remembers how they had all saved each other, how they had built a family from scratch, how they had proved that love doesn't always look like what you expect. And she whispers, to Marcus, to Sarah and Lily, to all the angels watching over them, "Thank you. Thank you for making him open that door. Thank you for giving us each other. Thank you for our beautiful, imperfect, chosen family." The story of the little girl who asked a grumpy billionaire, "Can you take me to find my mom?" became a legend in their neighborhood, told to children as proof that kindness can change everything, that helping others helps yourself, and that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. It reminded people that wealth isn't about money but about relationships, that strength isn't about never needing help but about having the courage to ask for it, and that love is the only investment that always pays dividends. Every time someone tells a story, they end it the same way Destiny does, and they all lived differently ever after. Not perfectly, not without problems, but together. And that made all the difference. Because in the end, that's what the story is really about. Not a grumpy billionaire or a desperate little girl, but about how 2 broken families became one whole one, how strangers became family, and how the simple act of opening a door can change everything. Can you take me to find my mom? 7 words that started a journey that proved love is always the answer. Family is what you make it, and it's never too late to start living with your whole heart.